some more folks joining us, but it is moving into the evening, so we ought to commence. My name is Dave Pine from the Board of Supervisors. So welcome to our October meeting of the Peninsula Clean Energy Initiative. So as usual, we can just do some quick introductions. That one. Okay. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Goethals.
Joe Goethals, San Mateo. Charles Stone, City of Belmont.
Susie Ray, League of Women Voters.
Landis Martela, Electrical Workers Union, 1245.
James Rebellum, San Mateo Building Trades.
Diane Bailey, Menlo Spark.
Stacy Hoffer, Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County.
Chelsea Bonini, San Mateo County School Boards Association.
Harvey Rarback, Special Districts Association.
Kirsten Schwind, Pacifica Climate Committee.
Jan Butts, San Mateo Community Choice.
Marianne Osberg, San Mateo Association of Realtors.
Dante Hall, Foster City.
Christian Murdoch, City of Pacifica.
Julie Underwood, Daly City.
Lori Liu, Brisbane City Council.
Pradeep Gupta, South San Francisco.
Wayne Lee, City of Millbrae.
Brad Donahue, Town of Colma.
Heather Abrams, Menlo Park.
And
Cameron Johnson, San Carlos City Council.
Very
in
good.
the nick of time.
We were waiting for you. So again, welcome. I think our meeting today may not run the full 2 hours, but that's not the worst thing in the world. And I'll also point out that our meeting in November is the third Thursday of the month, so it's a little different Thursday. And the plan is, at this time, not to convene a meeting in December, give people a breather. This group has been quite good at attending our meetings, and we'll take a breather in the month of December. Okay, so let's look at the minutes. Hopefully you've all had a chance to peruse those. If there's any changes that are needed, we can certainly make those. Yes?
Yeah, I made a request in the last meeting that I think was not reflected in the minutes.
Okay.
And that request was that the consultants update the draft feasibility plan to reflect the assumptions in their model about energy efficiency and rooftop solar. They said they did have some assumptions in the model, but they weren't written out. And my request is that they actually write that out in the plan.
Okay, so noted. We'll make sure they do that. So your recollection is that they had that data, but just wasn't in the report for some reason.
It was in their model. And so I asked a question about, did they address it? And they said, well, it was in the model, but they didn't make it explicit in the text. I asked them to make it explicit in the text. So I'd like that request to be reflected in the minutes.
Okay. And we'll take that under consideration. Presumably that will be fine. Landis?
Yeah, on page 2. Is that what? No, on page 4. I'm not sure what it's either. It's a typo. It says nearly 30% of PG&E's portfolio is greenhouse gas free. That's actually 60% of PG&E's.
Is CHG free? Yeah, I'm looking for that.
And maybe you were talking about their renewable energy, but category 1 is near 30, I think now, or 28 or something.
Right. So yeah, I think if we're referring to CHG free, that 60 is the right number.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, any other revisions? Okay, seeing none, we can consider those approved. All right, very good. We'll take a chance now to take any public comment. If there's anyone in the audience who wants to speak to the advisory committee, this would be an opportunity to speak on an item not in the agenda. Yes, please. If you just would introduce yourself.
Ted Howard. Just wondering, I didn't see it in anything yet, and maybe it's been brought up, but have you considered
forming a flexible purpose corporation, also known as a social purpose corporation. And if you're not aware, or if people aren't aware of what that is, I could give a quick highlight.
You might just speak to it for a moment. I don't know if it would be workable here, since this is this is going to be a government entity, a joint powers agency. But go ahead and speak to it for a moment.
Well, it's just so you know, it's something Governor Brown created in 2012 or had approved, and it's for a company that doesn't want to pursue the profit motive, or an organization. They can have a social purpose above and beyond that. So that allows the board of directors for that company to pursue a social purpose and not be held by shareholders or whatever to a profit motive. So there's advantages there, legal advantages and freedom of pursuing the social purpose instead. So it might be something worth looking into if that's feasible. As you say, it may not be if it's originating from a government organization.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if any of our councils here, but I mean, my limited understanding is that that'd still be a private corporation, but they are free to pursue other goals beyond just maximizing their profit, while we would be a governmental entity. And of course, we don't seek any profit. I don't know if David Silverman, do you want to speak to that?
First of all, hello everyone. I'm David Silverman. I think most of you have met my colleague Kathy Miola. I'm with the County Counsel's Office, and I'm going to be taking over for her. Yeah, it wouldn't be permitted. Actually, what the statute, the Public Utilities Code says, it actually has to be either a government entity or a JPA made up of government entities.
Yeah, I assume so.
Those are the only two ways that you can do it.
Okay. Thanks for the suggestion. Another comment?
Hi, I'm Tom Cottrell. I'm here as both a citizen and also I'm with Solar City.
Oh, yes. Good.
So in looking at the technical report, I did not see in there, and maybe I missed it, any consideration for the electrification of the transportation system, the possible projections for increased demand from the consumers. Because it looked like just sort of using the traditional percentage increases that we've seen in the past, and I think there could be a step function in there. And then the other thing I didn't see in there was any potential limitations or restrictions that the ISO would put on a quick step function in switchover to renewables. I talked to Sonoma County, or Sonoma Clean Power. And of course, when I looked at the sources, they didn't have any solar in there. It was all renewables from the geysers mainly,
right,
which is 24/7, of course, but solar would not be. So is there a restriction on, or is the impact potentially from the PCE large enough that it would cause some restrictions from not having enough storage in the area for the ISOs to regulate the technical aspects of the energy? So, and then the last comment is just in again discussing this with Sonoma Clean Power when they made the switch over, and I know that may be down the road here, but when they made the switch over, there was no advance warning, or maybe it was insufficiently communicated to existing rooftop solar homeowners that they would lose any net metering credits and or have a true-up bill that was due immediately, and it caused a flood of service calls. And so again, this may be a premature comment, but wanted to make sure that in the communications to the public about this, that in terms of how that switchover would be done, and the timing of it for rooftop solar owners might have to be delayed in order to take advantage of any credits or net metering issues that could come up from an immediate switch. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, great. No, that's helpful input. On the first point, in terms of our technical studies, kind of looks at the next 10 years. And so we'll go back to our Pacific Energy Associates and ask that question about, hopefully we're going to have a great growth in electric vehicles. And also one of the hopes for the Peninsula Clean Energy would be that, we potentially could get in the business of helping to deploy charging stations and things of that kind. So we will follow up on that. Jumping to the third one, I wasn't aware of some of those issues you had raised, and again, it's likely to be a priority for the new entity to encourage rooftop solar and make sure that, potentially, as they've done in Marin and Sonoma, provide favorable economics for rooftop solar, and we certainly wouldn't want any glitches there. So that's a good piece of information for us to pursue.
When we looked at our own customers, the effect that immediate switchover as opposed to delaying until they're true up, their economic loss could have been anywhere from $100 to as high as $1,000 in loss in credits and or having a true-up bill which became immediately doable depending on when their solar anniversary was. So
yeah,
it was significant enough to cause lots of angry people.
Well, it's helpful not to be the first, so we can learn from others' experience. And we're going to be in the customer service business here, so we'll bring that to ground. And maybe we can talk offline about your second point, which I think I personally need more information about in terms of understanding the issue you raised. I don't know if anyone in the group would like to hear more about that, but we certainly can address that offline. All right, any other public comment tonight? Okay, then seeing none, we'll move to an update from Jim Egermeyer. As has been the case during this process, a lot happens between meetings. So, Mr. Egermeyer.
Thank you, Supervisor Pine. Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to let you know, too, that Kirsten from our office was not able to make it, so Gordon is back there kind of double duty, taking notes, and so if you can speak slowly, he can get everything down as well as checking people in. So thank you again for coming tonight, and with that, I'd like to share a number of things that our office has been involved with. Here's a kind of our meeting agenda. I think you're all aware of that. That's sitting in front of you. But presentations since the last time that we met, we've had a number of Rotary clubs that we've been reaching out to and making presentations to, along with some new items relative to community workshop, one up north in Burlingame, another down here in or closer to Redwood City there. And then I also participated and made a presentation to the San Mateo Sustainability Commission. And then recently we've also participated at the Pescadero Advisory Council meeting there, the PMAC meeting. So upcoming presentations, we'll be going out to Half Moon Bay this weekend, and then also a community workshop coming up soon with the City of San Mateo, Half Moon Bay, Lions Club, and then also another one, Daly City, and Pacifica, and then San Francisco Green Festival Expo will be providing some information, and we will be involved there. So this past Tuesday, I met with the Board of Supervisors and discussed the introduction of an ordinance forming the JPA, as well as requesting additional monies to move into phase 2 of our efforts. This is a 3-phase effort that the Office of Sustainability is taking on in conjunction with our consultants. But we had a very successful workshop with the Board of Supervisors on October 6th. And there was a number of background information provided to them about our advisory committee meetings, as well as the presentation by PEA about the technical study. And then we also had from County Counsel's office, both David Silberman and Kathy Miola, a presentation on the JPA documents, the resolution, and the ordinance that is necessary to move through for the formation of this JPA. So that was a very successful meeting. And then 2 weeks later, which was this past Tuesday, we returned to the Board of Supervisors and introduced the ordinance for the formation of the JPA. So we will in turn have a second reading, and then our ordinance for San Mateo County will go into effect 30 days later. But also joining us tonight is David Silverman, which you've had a chance to meet here a few minutes ago. He's going to talk a little bit more about the JPA efforts and what has been transpiring over the last couple of weeks with that. So the other aspect of the request this past Tuesday was some additional monies to move into phase 2. And what we have here is a summary of those 4 main topic areas that we're going to be moving into in this phase 2. So under the first part of the work plan, the Peninsula Clean Energy and Agency program design is really going to start to move toward designing a program and seeking the energy products. And essentially the way I like to look at it is what will the blends of energy be that we'll be able to offer the customers associated with this JPA. And for example, that would be the 50%, 75%, or 100% clean energy. So we're going to start to get into the really specific aspects of that and looking towards making recommendations to the JPA about that. There's also going to be the related work on the JPA about governance, and then also the formation of a new board of directors for that JPA. And then the last area is really the formation of the agency's administration. So the kind of behind the scenes back office group that will support the JPAs in their everyday efforts. The second area that we're going to be moving into is now a city outreach effort. And this is going to include support and assistance to the cities in San Mateo County. And really what we're starting to do now is shift towards the customers. We've been kind of outreaching to the elected officials and the people that are really interested in participating at those public meetings with those officials and you. And in turn now we're going to start to focus on the customers and the public at large. The next area is the technical requirement. And now we're going to be transitioning from feasibility analytics to now more of a power product design. So this is kind of a really important aspect of taking the details and really getting into the details with the different cities that would be participating in the JPA. We're also going to need to work on an implementation plan for certification with the CPUC. So what's important here in the implementation plan is knowing who the customers will be, and in turn what is and what power procurement and blends that we'll be providing. So this is the information that we would be providing to the CPUC for certification. Along with that, in a parallel track, we'll be developing and working on the RFP for the power procurement, that blend, those blends, those different sources of energy that we'll be seeking. And then last in the technical requirement area is working with PG&E, establishing the partnership with them in moving forward with this formation and procurement and delivery of energy. And then the last area is essentially our external affairs and community engagement. I have mentioned this before. We're shifting towards public education and also looking to the PCE branding and program awareness, how we can, what different mediums we can use to reach out to the public for their involvement and understanding of what we're trying to do here. And then the last part of external affairs really is involved with an RFP that we'll be doing relative to marketing and communications. So that kind of summarizes those 4 parts of the phasing. And this is a document or a table that we've been using in all of our presentations relative to the 3 phases. We're just finishing up with phase 1 and we're moving into phase 2, and I just summarized the aspects that we'll be focusing on, and then the timing associated with that is October now through February. And then a little bit later on tonight, Sean Marshall from Lean Energy is really going to share with you the steps that are involved in the phase 3 of this project. There's a little bit of overlap. We have the same slide that you'll see up here about phase 2, and then she has some additional details that she's going to share with you about phase 2, but really be focusing in on phase 3. As I mentioned, going to the board, one of the requests to the board was the monies associated with phase 2, and as you can see here, bold at the very bottom is the $800,000 that the board has now allocated to the Office of Sustainability for the areas that are in the left-hand column up here, which I've shared with you, the main tasks that would be associated with all of those. And then the last thing I want to share with you is relative to kind of our Facebook group. And so we just started those outreach efforts in that fashion. So I just wanted to kind of share this effort with you. And you can see Gordon's been adding a few things into that as we've been proceeding along. So I wanted you to be aware of those efforts as well. Last thing before we kind of move into a little bit of background and information about our website and the launch and our logo and those efforts, I'd like to make sure that you have and are aware of when you first came in those handouts that we had up there. Those are really important documents. The large 11 by 17 trifold is in fact a summary of the technical analysis, the executive summary. We were able to take that and kind of graphically depict that information and kind of give it a little bit more of a splash than what we've had in, excuse me, in the technical study itself. So with that, I'm going to kind of conclude the current efforts that we've been doing in the county, and then at the end of the evening, I have a couple other slides about the next steps that we'll be taking. So thank you.
Any questions for Jim Landis?
Did you, you said there was a 50, 75, and 100% option?
Yeah, those were examples.
Oh, I see, examples.
Just
Thank you.
Examples. Yeah, we just kind of give you an idea that that's an example that we'll start to explore for further involvement in research.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions, Pradeep?
Just one question on the budget part. You said that phase 2 has been modified to include some new elements than previously defined. Am I understanding correctly? Is the budget for phase 2 the same as it was before, or
Yes.
is it changed?
No, it's still the same. I want to say back in February, I think when we first shared the 3-phase approach with the Board of Supervisors, it was that same 3-phase document and the associated funding. We've just concluded phase 1, which was $300,000, and I recently asked for the $800,000 in for phase 2.
Thank you.
I think there's a question in the end. Yes.
Jim, could you say a little bit more about the timeline and the process for the determining the energy mix and the technical requirements? Who will be doing that when?
So, well, really what I can share right now with you is that we're going to be internally working with PEA and then also Sean Marshall. I think she just walked in right now. So, so that's in the next couple months. That's really what we're going to start to focus in on and really work with PEA to see what the potential could be and do our background, do our research so that we can share that with you as well as with the JPA. So as soon as they start to form, we can start to give them the opportunities to explore and ask them what additional information the JPA may need from us. I hope that helps.
The question over here.
Further along those lines, thanks for that explanation. That's really helpful, and it's really encouraging to see that you'll be working with PEA to develop some of the potential portfolio types for the JPA. I'm just wondering if you could bring that work back to this committee to discuss in the coming months, because I think a lot of the cities and stakeholders in this process will be really interested in, you know, how far can we push the envelope, or how high of renewable content can we get in a portfolio without costing ratepayers any more money? It seems like there's a lot of room to go up from 50%, but I'm not sure that you could just extrapolate from the feasibility study. So I imagine you'll be looking into that, and many of the folks in this room would have great interest in that.
That's very true, and the one thing I start to see as we proceed in our collaboration with the cities and working with the city councils is we're going to start to get an idea of those who are thinking about joining in the JPA. So now we can start to hone in what are the totals that we'll be seeking and what their specifics and their interests may be that we can start to bring towards. But good topic, and I would really look to Supervisor Pine, Supervisor Groom for their guidance on adding items onto our agenda for further discussion around that topic.
Dave, can I ask one
yes,
more question? I just wanted to highlight one concern which you might keep in mind when you're doing that study. There are some cities which will be more favorable towards green content than price consideration, and vice versa. Different customers will have different preferences. So first, I like to make sure that when you assume the content of the total energy in terms of how much is green and how much is not so green, you keep some flexibility regarding the choices that customers will make, number one. Number two, depending on the content of green energy versus not green energy, the portfolio structure will be different in terms of PCE. So the price or the rates that will come out of PCE will depend on how much of that portfolio is buying cheaper and more expensive energy components, which will depend on the customer choices, whether they buy clean energy or not. So it's a kind of roundabout thing, and I think you can assume as a starting point, but you can't finish the study based on just the assumptions. You'll have to go into the market to fix up later on, or tune the actual rates and prices that will come out of that total mix. So I wanted to keep that in mind when you do the study. I'm not asking you that question right now because you still have to do that.
True.
Okay.
I follow. Thank you.
Any other questions? So, just to put an emphasis on the point, it's I'm very pleased and excited that the Board of Supervisors has approved the first reading of the Community Choice Energy Ordinance. So that's kind of the very first kind of formal step towards making this a reality. We'll have a second reading at our next board meeting. And then the other element, of course, is the Joint Powers Agreement, which we'll talk about later this evening. And as I think you're all aware, we're now in this very important stage where, we're working with each of the cities to see if they, want to pass an ordinance and sign a JPA between now and the end of February for this kind of initial launch. That's the current timeline. So we've already started to go to we appear at city councils. Study sessions are being scheduled, and I think as we get into January, we'll have probably a better sense for how the cities are. Both looking at the idea and also kind of looking at the schedule, because it's a doable schedule, but it's certainly not a lot of time given the holiday. So we are looking forward to this next phase of signing up cities. So that's where we are. Okay, then we will proceed with a review of our website. So this is a great place to get your input. I just liked our Facebook page. I urge you all to do the same. And so let me introduce Sarah Seward from Circle Point.
Hi, everyone.
And she'll talk about the website, the logo, and our branding overall.
So some of you may remember meeting Ray Quigley, my colleague at Circle Point. I'm an art director there and won't take up a lot of your time tonight, but pretty excited to share with you some of the recent progress that we've made. So this is the Peninsula Clean Energy logo, Mark, which some of you may have seen. We very recently got sign off on it through a collaborative process, and essentially the themes we wanted to communicate with it were the idea of sustainability, energy, and community choice. So I think from the logo, Mark, you can kind of see those elements representing that. And then to help everybody kind of have cohesion and communicate consistently about the brand, we've developed some brand guidelines that will be made available to the county and staff to kind of keep everybody on the same page with regard to typography and use of color, just kind of keeping a consistent visual language so that when people see this program, it'll always look the same and it'll look consistent to them. Some of the collateral that we've updated to kind of match the brand includes the frequently asked questions, meeting flyers, talking points, glossary of terms, some brochures, and the PowerPoint template that we're using tonight. And all of these things just kind of work in concert, and they're all available for download on the new website as well. And then the last piece is sort of that folding accordion brochure that you guys saw tonight. That's the community guide. And the idea about this is to really just make a very technical document accessible to the general public, highlighting those key findings and providing points of entry for folks who want to delve deeper into the technical material. And then the new website, which we actually just launched today. If anybody's been to peninsulacleanenergy.com before today, there was kind of a splash page up that had just some very high level information, but now it's actually a full-blown website, and I'll see if it opens here. So it opened for me.
Here comes Gordon, he'll help you.
I see it was open, but I wasn't sure how to make it show. Cool, and then to go back. Okay, so this is the website. I would encourage everybody to pull it up on your phone. It looks beautiful on mobile as well as desktop. Kind of check it out and test drive it. It's pretty message driven, so you can see the different elements at work here. It's kind of, oh, sorry, where is it? I'm a Mac user. Yeah, it looks like that works. Cool. Okay, awesome. So you guys can see this. So this is what the home page looks like. The sliders just providing different points of entry into the various subpages of the site, giving a high-level overview about how it works, talking about the benefits, giving people a way to stay connected and letting them know about the advisory committee right away, and then getting them connected to the different resources that we have on the website. So I don't know how interested folks are, and if they want me to click through this whole thing, I probably won't do that, but we did build the site for the future, so it definitely includes pages that are specific to residents and businesses, where over time, as you develop more materials for those specific groups, even about, specific interests like billing information and rates and that kind of thing that's applicable to those target audiences, the website is built to accommodate that. There's a great Get Involved page that has lots of ways for people to stay connected, whether it's through social media or coming to an event. All the information is here for them. And there's also a page specific to the advisory committee that we would encourage you guys to check out, where all the materials from the past meetings and upcoming meetings are going to be kept for the record. So feel free to check that out anytime, and you can access things. And then finally, on the resources page, all of that collateral that's been redeveloped is all available here for download and sharing, as well as some additional resources about CCE. And then we also have a sub-page that's basically a interactive version of the accordion guide that you guys have in front of you tonight. These different tabs open, and it has the same kind of content that was pulled from the executive summary about the technical study. So people that maybe don't have access to the print material can go ahead, go online, and get these same details. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the website while I'm still on it? Yes?
I'm curious why you made it a .com rather than a .gov or a .org.
That's a great question. In terms of discoverability for SEO purposes, .coms are a little bit easier for folks to get a hold of and remember, so that's kind of why we decided to go that route. It would be a really easy to remember URL. Any other questions? Yes?
Okay.
So will there be a link to this off of the Office of Sustainability's webpage? Because I looked at it today, and I'm looking at it now, and I don't see it right as of yet.
We literally just launched
Okay.
the site today. Like, we pushed the go button before this meeting. We wanted to share it with you folks first, so it's brand new.
Yeah, and this new website will essentially replace what we have currently on the Office of Sustainability website, so it'll just be a link redirecting it to this new website.
Great, thank you.
I wonder whether you're going to be securing the .gov and other links so that other people don't secure them for us.
We hadn't necessarily planned on that, but we certainly can.
And I just have a short comment. I was handing out flyers for the coming events, and one of the things people kept asking me for was, where's the website? And there wasn't, the only thing there was Kirsten's email at the bottom, and so it was kind of like, oh, I thought I would ask today, and now I kind of know why.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, most of the materials that are available for download all have the URL on them now. There just wasn't very much there for folks to grab onto until today. So it's new, and it should be on everything. So if you see something it's missing on, please let us know. We'll make sure to get that on there. Any other questions?
What's our plan for other languages?
Well, we don't necessarily have a detailed plan in place. There's several options we can do for other languages, ranging from, very labor intensive to more general, like a Google Translate button. It really depends on what the county's desire is to deliver and how many languages probably.
Because I imagine Marin and Sonoma, since they're operating entities, I would assume they probably have other languages, but.
I don't think that Marin does, but I would have to double check. It's been a little while since I was on their site. So we can look into that. And if there's a precedent that the county has, we're happy to help accomplish that.
Thank you. Any other questions or input? Looks really good.
Thanks. We're pretty excited to be sharing it with you.
Looks like we have more done than we do.
Well, I mean, the big question, is what's next. So in terms of developing the website and the brand and the collateral, we were able to be really efficient with resources, which means we're going to be able to help support the program with a little bit of additional outreach in terms of, helping reach out to, providing materials to reach out to the cities and keeping the website up to date and possibly helping to promote it. So some of the things that we could do are things like a short animated video, or we could help develop some social media assets for sharing, or add some interactive elements to the website, like the timeline, for example, is something you could make interactive and give people more detail about the different stages of what's happening. So those are all ideas for things that we could do. All right.
Pradeep?
In terms of the language, at least for South San Francisco, I would recommend a language button on the top, which could give the choice of English, Spanish, or Chinese, if Chinese is also important. But having a well-designed different language website rather than Google translation, which can distort a lot of meanings.
Absolutely.
Hi, I just wanted to comment that I've been going to some of the community meetings for Silicon Valley Community Choice,
yes.
and they have created about an 8-minute short animated video for their community workshops that seems to work pretty well.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Silicon Valley. So 8 minutes is pretty long. I think for the general public, that would be a very in-depth video. It would have to be pretty engaging to keep your eyeballs on it, so I'll check that out.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you for all your work and the unveiling of the site tonight. Very much appreciate it. Okay, our next item is to give you an update on the Joint Powers Agreement. And as you'll recall, at one of our advisory committee meetings, we highlighted 10 or 12 issues and asked for input from the group. And to get the legal drafting going, we did what lawyers always do: is we found somebody else's agreement. In this case, Sonoma and Marin. And we kind of figured, okay, they've done it. It works for them. We got the input from the advisory committee. We'll put that in the document. Should be in pretty good shape. But we made the good decision of asking for input from all the city attorneys. And David will explain that process, and they've added a lot of value to it. So the next CCA will be, I suspect, stealing our agreement. So
yeah, be careful about asking attorneys for input, because you'll get it. As Mr. Pine indicated, Supervisor Pine indicated, immediately after the last meeting in September, my colleague Kathy Miola took the Sonoma agreement, and it was based on the Marin agreement, and she actually made sure that it reflected the feedback she got from this group. And we immediately forwarded it to all of the city attorneys for all of the cities and towns in the county. And we gave them approximately 3 weeks to review it and set up a meeting where actually, I would say, 17 of them came. And we spent about 2 hours going line by line through the agreement. And as Supervisor Pine indicated, there was lots and lots of input. All of it good, actually. They really did a great job improving the agreement. I had originally anticipated that a couple of hours would be enough. That was actually last week. It wasn't, so we scheduled another meeting this week. And again, a lion's share of the city attorneys showed up, made a lot of additional changes, got through the entire agreement. And I think at the end, we have an agreement that perhaps not everybody loves, but everybody likes. The next step is to clean it up. There were a couple, I would say, policy decisions that need to be made based on requests that the city attorneys made that are totally consistent with what this group recommended, but are tweaks that provide a little bit more protection for the members of the JPA. So we just need to make those decisions, clean up the version, and send it back out to the city attorneys for just a final opportunity to take a look at it. I anticipate that'll happen next week, and the hope is that it will go to the Board of Supervisors for approval sometime in November. So that's where we are with the JPA agreement. Is there anything else you'd like me to add, Supervisor Pine?
I don't know if you want to highlight one or two points that came up that are new, that might be new to the group, or.
A lot of it was just that, lawyers can make things way more complicated than they need to be. And there were a lot of things like that the city attorneys identified. So, for example, I think there was some discussion, I wasn't here, but based on what Kathy told me, Sonoma had put together I won't say a complicated, but a voting system that's two-tiered. First is just a general one director, one vote, but then it allows for a director to call for what's called a weighted vote based on the actual energy usage in the various jurisdictions. And the city attorneys were fine with it, but they correctly noted that it could be pretty confusing. So we cleaned it up, and that actually ended up with a lot. It resulted in a lot of changes in the agreement. The other issue, and this probably requires more discussion than this group would like, is there was a lot of language that was sort of vestigial from the Sonoma County agreement with respect to this idea of participants. As I think the group knows, once you have a CCE, you can allow other jurisdictions to utilize the CCE for power without them becoming members of the Joint Powers Agreement. And Sonoma had utilized a model that allowed that. And there was a lot of language in the agreement that created some confusion with the city attorneys with respect to that issue. But if you look at the agreement, lawyers love redline. I don't know how familiar you are with redline, but lawyers love redline. When you look at the agreement, it looks like it went through a battle. It's covered in red, but really the fundamentals that were presented to this group are still there and still in there. It's just it's a much cleaner, much easier to understand document than when we started.
Linus.
And I didn't quite catch that. You're talking about a CCA essentially selling energy outside of their geography?
That is one option, yes. And,
Okay.
and actually, Marin Power does that. Yes. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I know everyone loves talking about contracts.
We have some lawyers in the room, so Charles is one of them.
Can you identify them for me?
David, could you talk for a second about, I think some concerns were voiced about shielding the cities from any liability,
Yeah.
financial liability. Can
Yeah.
you talk about whether or not those fears were allayed and go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't think that you can ever fully allay a lawyer regarding concerns about liability, but we did. We talked a lot about that, and a good portion of both meetings were not designed, but what happened is we ended up discussing operationally the way that the CCE works and why or why not it would result in liability for the cities. So let me think of some key points. The first is we talked about the fact that the way that the JPA is set up, and this is contemplated both by the Joint Exercise of Powers Act and specifically in the Public Utilities Code, it's set up so that all of the liability, all of the exposure for were the JPA to fail is with the JPA. And we talked about that, and I really did not sense that any of the city attorneys had any issues with that at all. But then the way the agreement is drafted, it does provide for some exposure, some financial exposure for folks who withdraw from the JPA if it results in costs to the JPA. And we kind of talked about that, what that meant, and there was some concern raised about that. And so we actually drafted an additional provision that's designed to provide even more protection for the cities who might want to withdraw. That language still hasn't been finalized, but when we were done, I sensed that the city attorneys were relatively satisfied with it. In addition, just like a general issue of liability, so the city of El Cerrito, which recently in 2014 joined the Marin JPA, actually hired a very big, very prestigious international law firm. For those law firm junkies out there, it's Davis, Wright, and Tremaine, to do a liability analysis. And actually, the city of El Cerrito provided that liability analysis in a public meeting, and so I circulated that to all of the city attorneys for their review. I mean, so again, in sum, I can't say that all the city attorneys are 100% sure that there's absolutely no liability, but I think that they left about as comfortable as they're going to get. Is that responsive?
Absolutely.
Thanks. Sure. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question. There's been, at least I've heard some talk that maybe this is moving really aggressively through there. And the question that I have is there a consensus among the city attorneys that you'll be able to meet the February deadline?
Gosh, consensus. That is definitely something that came up. And what was the most recent discussion. So, in some ways, the JPA agreement, they're pretty standard. I mean, there are whatever 5, 6, 7 JPAs in the county. This JPA agreement doesn't differ significantly from other JPA agreements. There are some specific provisions that are specific to the CC, but not a lot of them. I think the sense that I got from the city attorneys that the concern about the speed was twofold. One was, is my city council and am I going to be up to speed with this enough to advise them before they have to make a decision? And I mean, I've been working on this a month so far. I mean, I won't say I'm an expert, but I'm starting to get a handle on it. I mean, I think I have great faith that your city attorneys are very, very smart and capable people. I think they'll be able to do it. The other issue was just procedurally looking at the fact that the ordinance needs to be needs to be introduced. Then there needs to be another meeting for adoption. And then there's the 30-day period before ordinances normally take effect. The question was, well, with the holidays coming up, can we get all of that done by February 29th without causing our city council's heartache and difficulty? And so we're actually talking about that internally right now to see whether or not we can buy a little bit more time without pushing out the schedule. And, without committing, I think we can. But that was definitely an issue that was raised, and it's a very reasonable one. Is that responsive? It is. Yeah.
I think we have another question from Pradeep.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad that you raised that question about deadline and scheduling. One of the questions that I'm not very clear in my own mind, Dave, is that 29th of February date is for the first few pioneers of PCE, the ones who are early adopters.
We are hoping more than a few, but yes.
I'm not saying 2, but let's say whatever number is.
Yeah.
But any other city that may not be joining by 29th of February can still come in and join PCE. Am I right or wrong?
Yes, there'll be subsequent opportunities for. I don't think it's realistic to think that all 20 cities will join in the first go around. And if a city chooses not to, for whatever reason, there'll be subsequent opportunity to join. In Marin and Sonoma, that's how it worked. And they started with some subset of their cities, and eventually everyone did join in. When Sean could speak a little bit to when that, I don't recall when that second opportunity would come up. I think it's, it might be, is Sean still here 6 months out or something, or?
Actually, it's likely to be probably the spring of 2017 or a little later, because you're going to have to phase. We'll talk about some of this in my presentation, but you phase your roll-in of the founding board. So you have to pay attention to that first and get those customers enrolled and get your program up and running and all of that. And then some period of time thereafter, there will be another period at which, you could think about it as open enrollment period, where the other cities will be invited to the table to join in. It could be a year, could be less than a year. It really, I think, depends on how things go with the rollout of the first tranche of customers.
I mean, just to add, just from a highly technical legal standpoint, the way the JPA agreement is written, future joining will be up to the JPA board. Just from a hyper-technical standpoint, the JPA board will have to approve additional members, but it's pretty standard.
I do understand your provision to have an entry, let's say after a year or whatever period you choose. I'm looking at what is the advantage to the cities who join after pushing the agenda so that we meet February 29th. even with the heartache of the councils, while other cities might wait for a year with two benefits. One, they don't have to push their councils with heartache. Number two, they'll have 1 year period to see how we perform, the early adopters perform. What's the advantage of the early joiners to do all these things by February 29th? I'm looking for that answer so I can answer that question.
Well, I'll start. I mean, I think there's a couple of advantages. I mean, one is, as a council, as a city, you're showing leadership on the issue of our day. And secondly, when the JPA is formed, let's say sometime in March, a lot of the basic fundamentals of how this new venture will operate will be determined by those founding board members. So I think a city will have more influence or have a seat at the table kind of during that kind of critical formation period. And again, can show a leadership position.
There's a third element.
Please.
So standing up just so you can hear me, the third element would be that it will be up to the JPA board to decide, but right now, the cities that choose to join the JPA and launch in the first round have no financial obligation because, as you all know, the county is sponsoring the startup effort. That is not necessarily the case for the cities that choose to join later. I'm not saying it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's not likely to be free because you would have to go back and do your data analytics and sort of integrate the power supply into the overall. They have to go back out to market. So there are definitely some costs associated with bringing new jurisdictions on that will probably have to be borne by that municipality. So it's just something to consider.
Thank you very much. And I think that's important information which could be included in more formal way with the invitations when you do send out.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
That's
you.
a good question. Good question. Mr. Coulson?
Well, since presumably most cities are interested in this because they're going to be they want to reduce their carbon footprints, this gives them a leg up. The early adopters can start reducing those footprints up to a year earlier, and that's important for a lot of us.
And just another point too on the pacing. We're hopeful and confident that the city representatives here on the advisory committee, your council is going to look to you because you've been immersed in this for so long, and so we're hopeful that your expertise and recommendation will help the process with the councils, with your respective councils.
All right. Anyway, I'd also observe I have now also joined the Facebook group, and while I was talking, Gordon approved me, which is fantastic. I don't know whether was I before Supervisor Pine or after.
Well, you're lucky we let you in.
Anyway, and I'm sorry, I introduced myself earlier. My name is David Silverman. I'm a Chief Deputy County Counsel for the County of San Mateo, and it was nice to meet you all.
So again, the process of having all the attorneys involved was really worked out well. Our next item is to go over the timeline, and Sean Marshall will walk us through that with a particular focus on Phase 3, I believe. And Phase 3, of course, is really the launching of the enterprise. That's when you're starting a business.
Okay, super. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. Before I get started on the slide deck, I'd like to just provide some additional context to some of the comments and questions that we've heard around the pacing and the timing, because it is moving quicker than many other JPAs have moved previously. It's maybe moving at the pace of a private sector.
Perish the thought.
It's interesting. But also, and we'll talk about some of this in the presentation, but there is a reason why we've identified the fall of 2016 as the potential launch. And then what you do, for all of you out there who do project management, you settle on sort of the launch, and then you reverse engineer and work backwards depending on what the statutory and project management requirements are. So the Uber question is, and I have explained this before, you know, why fall of 2016? And there are two reasons. One is that there is a summer tariff schedule for PG&E that runs between, I believe it's April and October. And when you're trying to kind of use PG&E as your benchmark, the comparator, you want to make sure that you're launching at a time that you have the greatest opportunity for economic advantage in terms of rate structures and tariffs to get your program up and running. So within that summer schedule is really the opportune time to launch a CCA program for the economics of it. The second reason is what they call durability of rates, because every year PG&E changes its rates in January, and so you don't want to launch too close to that January date, because then you're out of kilter with PG&E almost right away. So the sweet spot is generally spring to fall of each year. Having said that, you know, we hope that we will continue down this path and we'll launch at the designated time and all of that, but you know, the world will go on and the sun will continue to shine, we hope, if things slip and we have to go into the following spring. I'm not talking about that, but I just want to make that clear that there is a rationale for why we've identified the August-September timeframe, and so far so good. So unless there's a real reason, you know, the county will make that call, but I think we're gonna move forward with the current plan as it stands. So here it is. You guys saw this earlier. Now we're beginning phase 2. Jim explained sort of in high level terms what is contemplated here over the next 5 months. Jim, did you cover what we're really looking at between now and the end of February? Should I go into detail on this in terms of action items?
Maybe just explaining about the banker outreach.
Okay, cool. You've seen a lot of these bullets before, so focusing here on the banker outreach, you all know that the JPA, in order to be an independent organization, has to have working capital, and we also have to have significant credit capacity in order to sign a fairly large power contract to put power on the grid on behalf of your customers, and all of this is happening before you actually have revenues through the door. So there's this gap period between the time that you execute on contract and you begin receiving revenues. That's typically, you know, can be up to about 3 months. So you've got to have credit capacity to open your doors and to begin serving customers. So right now the county is working on sort of the constellation of local banks that might be interested. We're going out, we're doing just educational briefings. And then really when the beginning of the year starts and we begin thinking about what that agency is going to look like, how big it is, what kind of credit needs it has, then I imagine that the county will narrow the field and ultimately start talking terms and conditions with the designated bank. I don't know that it will be a local bank, but I know that's the preference, at least so far. Let's keep going here. You've seen all of this is what we're working on now between now and the end of February, and there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that supports each of these particular action items. Phase 3 begins in March of 2016, and the anticipation is that the board will be seated either in March or in April, depending on when all the JPA agreements are signed and all of that. We're hoping that that first group is pretty well done by the end of February, but there's always a little bit of a lag. So my hunch is that the first board meeting will be sometime late March, early April. From there, that sort of then becomes the decision-making body. So this group will ultimately morph into the board, and the board will take over then starting in March. The board will begin steps to organizational independence, including thinking about what it needs for staff, an office, the banking relationship, insurance, all the stuff for a startup company will now become sort of front and center for the board. It's very important. So when I was talking about reverse engineering, one of the key documents that guides a CCE program is the implementation plan. The implementation plan has to be submitted to the PUC, and the PUC has up to 90 days to certify it. It's sort of like your business plan. But we can't actually submit that business plan, implementation plan, until we know how many cities are at the table, which will tell us how many customers, how big is the load, and all that kind of stuff. So there's a real timing issue, and so there is a reason that we're still trying to hold to this end of February date, because you can't do that next step and trigger the 90 days until you know who you're dealing with. So that's the rationale there. In addition, we will be issuing sometime in that April timeframe RFPs for energy services. The board, I think, hopefully at the recommendation of this body, will sort of know what its power supply choices will be for its customers, and so that RFP will reflect the decisions of this body, and then the board of directors to sign off on that. There's also a component of data management. So there's a lot that happens for CCE that we call back office, and that is setting up the lockbox and sort of ratifying the revenues that come in through PG&E, because PG&E, remember, continues to collect on those bills, and then it transfers over to the CCE. So there's a lot of IT and data management, customer service, call center, all kinds of things that are managed through that data management company. And then a public marketing campaign will get underway. We expect that at the November advisory committee meeting, we will be dedicating a bunch of our time to plans for the 2016 community outreach and public marketing campaign, because it's going to ramp up. It's going to expand on what we've already done, but really take a much deeper and broader focus on reaching the public. So you will be seeing print advertising, there might be billboards, there might be radio spots, social media, certainly. And then, of course, we've got the whole customer enrollment, which is direct mail. And that happens starting in June. So in June, as we are coming down to the final months before launch, hopefully that those credit terms have been ratified, and the board will determine at what point it needs to begin to draw down its credit, because at some point the county money runs out, and then we have to begin to rely on working capital in order to finish launching the program and get into operations. And so that'll be the timing and finessing of that will depend on how much is left in the county coffers, and what the terms and conditions are for that credit capacity. By then, it's likely that there will be a director of the program, an executive director who takes it over, and now we're moving closer and closer here to independence. We've mentioned before that the current county team has offered to serve in an interim capacity to continue to support the board in its early stages until the executive director is identified and other staff begin to come on board, and you can see where you're weaning it off and it's becoming an independent, standalone agency. There's a lot of stuff that happens with the utility in phase 3. The utility service agreement is codified. The agency has to post a bond in the amount of $100,000. It also needs to submit a security deposit to PG&E, which is equal to 1 month's revenue. And then there's a whole bunch of regulatory registrations that need to happen for all of the different accounting metrics and stuff like that the regulatory bodies begin to document and track. So all of that stuff is happening in the last 6 months. It's possible that the first customer notifications could go out sometime mid or end of June if we are still anticipating a late August launch. If that slips by 30 days or so, then those customer notifications will slip. The bottom line is that the statutory requirement is that the direct mail notifications begin 60 days prior to enrollment and continue at least 60 days after. And then, of course, a customer can opt out anytime thereafter, but that's the statutory requirement of notification. Assuming that the program launches in August, you could begin to see first revenues as early as late September, but really I think it's probably more like October. We got information today that indicated that first revenues generally take about 45 days from the time of customer service. So right now, we're still holding up the August-September timeframe. If it goes to October, you're probably okay. But anything after that, and then I think you may be looking at really the spring of 2017, given the explanation I provided earlier. So that's probably a little more detail and granularity than you want, but that's the general big picture about what happens here through 2016 and through launch. So I'll stop there and see if you all have any questions about the process and what we're up to. Wow. Seeing none.
Question.
Yes.
Could you go over that part about customer notification and what does it imply, that 60 days for the customers, and when do they get, first time they turn the light switch on, PCE energy rather than PG&E energy? Is that one fixed day that everything happens, or is it gradual?
So it happens on a rolling basis because PG&E reads its meters and bills on a rolling basis. So so what happens is, and this happened for me as a customer, 60 days prior to service, you get either it's a postcard or a letter, whatever the county chooses to do, PCE chooses to do, that has some standard language in it. There's legal language and all that kind of stuff. And then 30 days later, it gets a second one. Remember that there's also advertising going on and all kinds of other things happening for public awareness. 60 days hence, that customer is enrolled into the program. But it's not, you know this, right? It's not a light switch, because the customer, remember that we experience nothing different, because it's still coming through the PG&E wire, we're still being billed by PG&E. So yes, there is a magic date at which your energy supply is now being provided by PCE, but you as an end-use customer wouldn't exactly know when unless you called them up. Does that answer your question? Okay. Sir.
Yeah, could you tell me what happens to this advisory committee in 2016?
My sense of it is, I'm going to also defer to my colleagues, that this advisory committee will remain in place until the board decides to take over. And we've identified March or April when I imagine some members of this advisory committee might end up on the board. I don't know that, because that's up to each city to identify a representative and an alternate. But it will morph, and then the JPA Board of Directors will take over and have these monthly meetings into perpetuity. Any comments? Any other comments? I'm looking at Supervisor. Okay.
Question. So in looking at the city council schedule for the ordinances, I see that some of them are informational sessions, some are study sessions, some are first readings. Can you talk about what the difference is, like why one city would do it in a different format than another? And if we don't see our city on that list, whose responsibility is it to be setting this up? Should we as the stakeholders be contacting our city staff, or is the Office of Sustainability handling that?
Okay. So to answer your first question, every city has different information needs. And so the county has offered up briefings, one-on-one meetings, and then study sessions. So a lot of the cities have taken advantage of the study sessions, and those are happening now through November and
Yeah, they've just started. I mean,
just started.
Right.
Yeah, I think the first one is Monday or something.
For example, we spent 20 minutes with East Palo Alto earlier in the week. But so the study sessions are just underway.
Jim, do you want to?
This is what you're looking at, right? Yeah, yeah. So, this was really just kind of a summary document, so everybody understood kind of the Office of Sustainability, Lean Energy, Supervisor Pine, Supervisor Groom, all of our involvement with the different cities, so everybody knew what everybody else was up to. So that's what this was really meaning to be, and however we can help the cities, that's what we're here for. Get on your docket, get on whatever we can help you with.
So would every city need to have a study session or informational session before having a first reading, or could it go straight to first reading?
No.
Okay. And who would be contacting the city staff about setting these up?
You can see us, and then we can start.
Okay,
that.
so we should
Yes.
help coordinate that?
Right.
That's my question.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we've been kind of working our way through this, through the cities, but I think there's some we still need to close the loop with. We have a question. Okay, go
Sorry,
ahead.
just to be clear, the idea is that by January, any kind of informational or study sessions that are needed happen prior to January, so that January and February really is about getting on the agenda for that first and second reading, because it does take, there's some time requirements in between those two things.
And have we determined, just a technical matter, if a city as I understand it, after the second reading, it's still a 30-day period until the ordinance is effective. As a technical matter, I'm hoping that's good enough to be seated at the JPA table, because otherwise you'd be asking people to be done by the end of January, which we couldn't do. That'd be just too tight.
If they're done by the end of February, you could still be seated in early April, right?
Well, I guess that's it's really a technical question. Maybe Mr. Silverman.
Well, so that's what I've been talking with the city attorneys about. I mean, there isn't a complete resolution yet. My view in reading the Public Utilities Code is that as long as the ordinance was effective before the CCE was actually operating as a CCE. So when we talked about perhaps when the implementation plan needed to be submitted, and we were looking for some clarification on exactly when that would be, and I'm sure you can help me on that. When would that be?
Well, the implementation plan gets submitted as soon as the board ratifies it, and so let's say that that's in April.
Okay,
at some point.
so if that were the case, then what we would want is we would want the second reading of the ordinance, the adoption of the ordinance, to happen by the beginning of March. Again, it may delay the submission of the implementation. If the implementation plan needs to be submitted in mid-April, then we'd be looking at getting the ordinances adopted by the middle of March.
Perhaps you could clarify, my mic seems to stop working. It was my understanding previously that the JPA was actually being formed by passage of the resolution, and the ordinance was required for the CCA. Am I mistaken in that? So that there's no implementation timeframe for the resolution to take effect upon adoption, right?
No, you're 100% right, and it's these things get conflated. So yes, so the resolution is necessary to authorize.
Oh, good point.
Your city to enter into the JPA agreement. That's instantaneous. What we're talking about is with the ordinances, any entity that wants to be a CCE has to adopt an ordinance. And so we're still having we're trying to figure out what the last possible date is, and I'm hoping we'll know that next week.
But I guess to answer my own question, if a council votes to enter into the JPA, then they have immediately are a member. Right. Right.
Seemed to be the question seemed to be, did they have to wait 30 days?
Yeah, I conflated the two, right.
It seems like there's no waiting period.
Other questions? Diane?
I was wondering if any cities have indicated support or affirmed that they want to join already, or would Atherton presumably be the first one?
Well, we've of course talked to lots of cities, most of the cities, and there's a great deal of interest. But again, until the council acts, it's ultimately it's the decision of those members, and so it's Atherton will be, and that's pretty definitive. They're actually doing a first reading on the 18th, because that one is quite.
Gordon's been in contact with George from.
Because that's pretty fast,
Yeah, I mean, for Atherton, it says tentative, so it's really based on what they say at the study session, and I think that's going to be also based on the direction that their council gives to their staff. So it depends on what goes on in that study session.
So if that's their study session, it's unlikely they'd have an adoption of the ordinance, I would think. But
Well, we're going to be at November 4th at the study session.
oh, excuse me. Yes.
It's a 4 o'clock afternoon.
Right. So perhaps Atherton will be. Yeah. Who wants to be first? We give you a prize. A handful of unbundled Rex. Go ahead.
Sean, could you please explain a little bit more? I'm having a hard time understanding of the JPA.
Yeah, so this is where I wish Pacific Energy Advisors was in the room, but this is my working understanding of it. So there's a summer tariff schedule where essentially the rate structures are such that I think they're a little higher, frankly. And so your revenue projections from that summer rate schedule are just higher throughout that time, especially for certain customer classes. So in PEA's experience in launching both Marin and Sonoma, they've determined that there's sort of this sweet spot during the summer tariff schedule, followed up by the fact that there's a durability of rates issue. But if you want more sort of the load curve and the more detailed response, we can ask them and send it out to the group.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful because we'll get this question time and time again as to what's the rush.
And is that really based on the assumption that we're striving for rate parity? Because I don't see how PG&E's rates necessarily would affect the rate that we're selling power. So is it based off of that assumption?
I don't think that the county's made a decision. I mean, ultimately, that's going to be the ceiling, I believe, would be rate parity. I'm guessing there's going to be an effort to come in slightly under, but I don't know that yet. But yes, we queue off of PG&E's rates because that's the point of comparison.
James.
So once the JPA is formed, it's going to be just city councils and none of the nonprofits sitting around the table here?
The members will be there'll be a board member from each of the cities that have agreed to participate. Now, the JPA, may very well form advisory committees, but when it's seated, it will just be the city council members with a vote. Of course, it'll be public.
Other questions about the plan or process of how this whole thing comes together? Okay.
One quick one. Dave?
Yes.
So back on the PG&E, I guess they're going to charge us for still delivery, right? Is that part of the rate too? PG&E is going to charge us for the delivery, right?
Oh, sure.
The rate fare?
Yes, so what will happen is customers will get your PG&E bill, and now for the electric generation part of your bill, you'll see Peninsula Clean, third-party supplier Peninsula Clean Energy. That's just for your generation. All of the other charges on that bill are essentially the same in terms of your taxes and transmission, distribution, all of that.
Okay.
One question.
Another one?
One more question.
I think you already expired your question.
I know. Well, I'm borrowing from the next meeting. The question is that, yes, PG&E will provide the billing as we have right now. But for example, I have solar on my rooftop and I get net metering kind of thing. So it's only $7 per month kind of stuff. And they true up at the end of the year about how much I've sold and all that. So when you say that it will be the same kind of billing, now PCE and bill will be also similar because my solar energy would be still valued at certain rate and sold at certain rate, which may be independent of what PG&E is paying me for, or do we have that detail yet? Not.
Do not have it yet. I expect that the program will have net energy metering program. Whether or not it's fully formed by the time the program launches, I don't know that yet. There may be a slight lag between when it sets its net energy metering rates versus what PG&E does. I know in Marin, we did it about 6 months later. In Sonoma, they were able to launch it quicker. So hopefully, it'll be pretty close to launch.
But if you're an early member, maybe you can...
you can influence
Influence, yeah.
Well put. Well put. Kirsten, yes.
I think that's a really important question. I think that will keep coming up.
Yes.
What about people who have solar on their roofs? I think that's a reason why I asked the consultants to make their assumptions about that in their model explicit in the feasibility study, so that we have something to point them to. We don't have anything explicit in our program yet because the program hasn't been determined, but at least we can say, you know, what were the assumptions in the feasibility study about rooftop solar, so that we have, you know, something to build on about that.
I also want to invite anyone who's interested in a webinar that Lean is actually hosting on November 13th. The whole topic is going to be net energy metering 2.0 and all the shenanigans happening at the PUC. And then we're going to have a speaker from Marin Clean Energy who runs their NEM program talk about the mechanics of how it works and leased rooftops versus owned projects and, you know, how those different things. So I invite you all to, that's at 10 a.m. on the 13th of November. If you're interested, let me know.
Would you
The
mind
webinar.
just emailing that?
Yeah,
Yes.
we'll make sure that gets out to the whole group.
I want to get back to one of the questions I asked at the last meeting about the cost of greenhouse gas reductions through this program, looking at different portfolio scenarios. And after the last meeting, I was told that that was a little too difficult to be assessed. And so we went and did our own assessment and found about $30 per ton to be the cost, which is fairly cheap. So $30 per ton of greenhouse gases reduced. If we're looking at 100% renewables, and I think it would be similarly favorable at a high level of renewables between 50 and 100%. And so I want to urge the county to look into that further. And what I would love to see at our next meeting is a little information about how different scenarios or approaches through PCE could help the county achieve its own climate goals. So if the climate goals of the county track with AB 32 at the state level, how could PCE play a role in helping the county deliver those roles, and just looking at the different approaches and how close they would get the county to that target. I think just looking at the unincorporated areas that the county has direct control over, and that information could be really helpful to the cities considering whether to join. I think that a lot of cities might value the additional greenhouse gas reductions and what that means to their own climate planning and sustainability.
I think, okay, and we're scheduled to talk about this further, I think.
Hi, I've attended 2 of the community workshops that Silicon Valley Community Choice Energy has held, and definitely there was a lot of questions about how is this going to affect my solar.
Yeah.
So I would definitely hope that in our public outreach that we're prepared to answer those questions, because in this case, I mean, it is prospective. We don't know exactly what the program is going to be, but people are looking for some sort of assurance. And the other factor is with the credit for solar installation expiring, a lot of people are considering whether they want to make that move now. And this is a factor that they're trying to weigh in on. Is it going to, what's my payback period going to be? Also, just whether when people are sizing their systems, they tend to only consider their own needs.
Right.
But if we were going to be utilizing solar rooftop as a source for our own renewable energy, then we might want to tell people that there is going to be some incentive so that the more solar they can produce, the better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the challenge will be is, you know, how much of that can get done, how fast.
I think it's the underline here, though, is that nobody should be waiting to put solar on their rooftop, because those rooftops, those net energy metered customers do get rolled into the CCE program. So there doesn't have to be sort of a choice to be made about that. So I think for those of you that are out in the community, you don't need to wait, because you will be enrolled at some point, I think, into a net metering program that potentially is more advantageous, but doesn't mean that there should be a big lag time in making that decision.
There just was a lot of nervousness about people wondering what that would be and would it work to their favor versus PG&E.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's one big takeaway from tonight's meeting, starting at the very beginning with Solar City's comments and other comments that have been made is, we really gotta, make sure we, make it easy as possible for people with existing solar and then be able to crisply answer these questions that do come up regularly. We'll need a real good FAQ on that.
Okay, last call for questions, really. Okay, thanks.
Is there a final question? I'm sorry. Julie?
Thanks. So PG&E, you mentioned them. Should we expect them to attend our meetings? I mean, do they play a role? Do they come out? Is there something we should expect from PG&E as we start to roll this out?
No, I mean, if you want to invite them to come, I'm sure they will, but they literally can't say a whole lot about CCE in a public forum. So you can invite them, I'm not sure what they would say.
Okay, right, Jim?
So Supervisor Pine, to begin with, this might be a quick meeting, but how about that agenda? I mean, we're like nearly right on time with each item.
We used the full 2 hours.
Yes. So I'll be brief here. These topics have already been spoken about from Supervisor Pine, mentioning here the adoption of our CCE. We introduced it here this past Tuesday. That's our first reading. Our second reading and adoption will therefore be on November 3rd. And then, as David Silberman had indicated too, that we're looking to move the resolution for the JPA agreement to our Board of Supervisors on November 17th. And that we've also been working on scheduling study sessions and assisting cities, which we've already seen that, and you have that as part of the handout tonight. And so essentially that concludes kind of the next major steps that we'll be doing, and looking forward to seeing you on the 3rd Thursday in the month of November.
Also, pick up the Daily Journal tomorrow. We anticipate there'll be an op-ed in there from Supervisor Groom and myself. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you for coming, and particularly for those cities who didn't see their name on that list, let's make sure we talk like tomorrow. Okay, all right. Thanks. Thanks again.
Thank you.